treated. And you know, this hypertension is the most common cause of cardiovascular disease, and its prevalence increases with the age. The people who are above 60, more than 50% of them you will find they are hypertensive, because the vascular stiffness happens over a period of time, atherosclerosis develop. So all these changes can lead to the target organ damage. So we need to initiate the therapy as early as possible so that these damage can be prevented. Now you all know that our body regulates the blood pressure either by postural baroreflex, you have learned in the physiology, or by renal regulation, that is renin, angiotensin, aldosterone, which we discussed in the last lecture. But that is for the chronic control or regulation. For acute control variations, usually the postural baroreflex regulates it. And what happens that in the baroreceptors in the carotid sinus, when they perceive the pressure is high, the stretch receptors are activated. You know all about it. Just I'll take a minute or so. As a result, it is going to inhibit the sympathetic discharge coming from the brainstem to the periphery. As a result, the release of norepinephrine will be decreased and vasodilatation will happen. Right. But let's say a person is in lying down position and suddenly he stands up. So peripheral pooling of the blood will take place. That will lead to less of pressure in the carotid sinus, and that is going to send a signal which will disinhibit the sympathetic outflow. Mind the term disinhibition of sympathetic outflow, right? So the body will try to increase the blood pressure because the patient is now in standing position. So disinhibition of the sympathetic outflow will lead to increase in sympathetic activity, increase in release of norepinephrine, and that will cause vasoconstriction, which will lead to the maintenance or regulation of blood pressure. So this is how the baroreflex takes control. But in cases of hypertension, when the patient develops hypertension, all these compensatory mechanisms have failed or not functioning properly. That is the reason the patient has developed hypertension. So as we earlier said, hypertension is sustained increase in blood pressure equal to or more than 140 by 90 millimeter of mercury. It is the most common cardiovascular disorder. Prevalence increases with age. And you know that the blood pressure is a product of cardiac output and peripheral resistance, right? So the drugs which can decrease the cardiac output, so it is a product of cardiac output into PVR. So the drugs which can decrease the cardiac output, number one, can decrease the blood pressure, or drugs which can decrease the peripheral resistance will also lead to decrease in the blood pressures. So now, can you please guess or tell me the drugs which have the potential to decrease the cardiac output? Please write in the chat box the drugs which have the potential to decrease the cardiac output. Amlodipine, diuretics, beta blockers. जिसने भी beta blocker लिखा है, 100 marks to them. Yes, the most important drug is the beta blockers or sympatholytics. Beta blockers, by directly acting on the beta 1 receptors present in the heart. Calcium channel blockers also. Yes, very right. Some people have written amlodipine. Sorry, amlodipine has main action on the vasculature. So beta blockers and calcium channel blockers, they are the main agents. Now let's talk of the drugs which can decrease the peripheral resistance. That means vasodilators, right? So write the drugs. Hydrochlorothiazide for vascular. Okay, that is a diuretic. Alpha blocker, yes, I take it. It is a vasodilator, right? But there are some nitrates, yes, very right. ACE inhibitor, right? Now, since we are talking of hypertension, and in the last lecture we talk of RAS system, so I told you that the ACE inhibitors are the drug which reduces both preload and afterload. So for the treatment of hypertension, they are preferred. Yes, hydralazine can also, but that is given in emergency. So cardiac output is a product of stroke volume and heart rate, and peripheral resistance can be altered by the structure of the vessel if it get damaged, or some vascular function that like endothelial damage is there that will decrease the release of nitric oxide and vasodilatation will be hampered. It happens in atherosclerosis cases and all. So we have the two targets, either to decrease the cardiac output or to give the drugs which have the vasodilatory potential. Okay, so some organic causes which can lead to increased cardiac output are renal artery stenosis, which can lead to hypervolemia. Similarly, other renal diseases, hyperaldosteronism, coarctation of aorta, stress itself, because sympathetic activation happens in stress, pheochromocytoma, because there is increased lead of catecholamines. So all these things can lead to increased cardiac output. Similarly, stress is also indicated in increasing the systemic vascular resistance, atherosclerosis or pheochromocytoma, thyroid dysfunction, diabetes. It affects the vasculature, cerebral ischemia. So all these conditions can lead to vascular resistance. Now, please let me tell you, 80 to 90% of the cases who are hypertensive, we label them as essentially hypertensive or essential hypertension because there is no cause find, no secondary causes there. Just 5 to 10% of the people we are able to find some issue or a cause, organic disorder. Now, if we are able to find an organic disorder, at least it can be treated. Maybe some renal dysfunction is there, coarctation of aorta or some other issues there that can be treated or surgery can be done, right? But 90% of the cases are idiopathic. Now, this is just a revision what you have read in your physiology classes, that what are the various mediators which are responsible for causing vasodilatation or vasoconstriction. Now, these agents are vasodilators. Nitric oxide, atrial natriuretic peptide, and the beta agonist by acting on the beta 2 receptor, which is present in the vasculature. So they, excuse me, so they act on their respective receptors. As a result, there is initiation of release of secondary messengers, right? Like in here, it is cyclic AMP with nitric oxide, it is cyclic GMP, which further stimulates protein kinase G. In this case, it is protein kinase A. And they have an inhibitory effect on myosin light chain kinase. And that is the reason the vasodilatation happens. At the same time, this protein kinase G also stimulates myosin light chain phosphatase. Since it is a phosphatase, it can cause dephosphorylation and ultimately leading to the vasodilatation. So this is a mechanism for the vasodilators. Now, what about the vasoconstrictors? Vasoconstrictors like norepinephrine, endothelin, angiotensin 2, all of them are going to act on their respective receptors which are present on the cell surface. Now, as this ligand bind to their respective receptors, some depolarization in the membrane take place, which can activate voltage dependent calcium channels. As a result, the calcium entry takes place, which has a direct effect on myosin light chain kinase, and vasoconstriction can happen. Right. So there are IP3 DAC pathways. All right, won't go into the detail. Just for a revision sake, I told you myosin light chain kinase and phosphatase, they are responsible for causing all these coupling. Why? So what are the various risk factors for cardiovascular disease? We have divided them into preventable and non-preventable ones. Like diabetes is a very big important preventable risk factor. Hyperlipidemia, high blood pressure, lack of physical activity, smoking, obesity, unhealthy eating, all can lead to cardiovascular disease. But out of these, the most important one is the hypertension or high blood pressure. The non-preventable are increasing age, male gender, race, family history of premature CVD. So we can't do anything about these, the non-preventable ones. Or males तो वैसे ही cursed हैं. So we can't do anything about it. So best is to concentrate on the preventable risk factors and take care of the CVD. So high blood pressure is a very important factor which can be controlled by non-pharmacological as well as pharmacological nature. So since we have already discussed that they are divided into essential hypertension and secondary hypertension. In essential hypertension, 90 to 95% of the people, there is no obvious cause. In secondary hypertension, there can be any organic disorder like renal artery stenosis, renal disease, hyperaldosteronism, stress, sleep apnea, thyroid dysfunction, pheochromocytoma, preeclampsia, aortic coarctation. So all these can be treated. So once if these organic cause is taken care of, the hypertension will subside by itself. But the major chunk of people comes in this category, which is essential hypertension. So how we classify the blood pressure? Now all you know that the normal systolic is believed to be less than 120 and the diastolic is less than 80. So the population which falls under this category, that is systolic from 120 to 139 and diastolic between 80 to 89. They are labeled as pre-hypertensive. And please remember the people who comes under this category, no pharmacotherapy is required. Pharmacotherapy of hypertension is only required if the blood pressure is more than 140 by 90. Otherwise, no need to give the pharmacotherapy. Then comes the stage 1 hypertension, where the systolic is between 140 to 159 and the diastolic is between 90 to 99. So the population which falls under this category, they are labeled as stage 1 hypertensive. So in stage 2 hypertension, if it goes or equal to above 160, the systolic, and the diastolic is equal to or above 100. Now, the population which comes under stage 1 hypertensive subclass can also be treated by lifestyle modifications or some non-pharmacological measures. Most of them, not all, of course, but pharmacotherapy may be needed over a period of time in this group. Right? So normal में तो pharmacotherapy का सवाल ही नहीं उठता. Pre-hypertensive में not required. You can go for lifestyle modification. But in stage 1 and stage 2 तो definitely we need it. Stage 1 में depending upon the patient characteristics, it may or may not be needed. Now, other category is isolated systolic hypertension, where the systolic is equal to or more than 140, but the diastolic remains less than 90. So most of the people you will see, they fall under this category, stage 1 and stage 2. The patients who come in the OPD are usually either in stage 1 or stage 2. Okay, now can you guess what kind of symptoms the patient have if he's a hypertensive? Are there some symptoms, or it can go undetected also? It usually go undetected for years and years, like in case of diabetes. But still, can you guess some symptoms or signs a patient may have who's hypertensive? Okay, edema, palpitations, no sleep, people are writing dyspnea on exertion, restlessness, palpitations, headache. Yeah, happy sir, very good. Headache and epistaxis, I take it. It is very common, and usually now it's an occipital headache which takes place. Epistaxis can happen if the BP shoots maybe above 170 or 180. It's again a very important sign. And please remember, epistaxis, a patient coming to an emergency with nasal bleed, the first thing you are supposed to do is check the blood pressure. It is a very important cause. Cold extremity, redness of eye, anxiety, palpitation, yes, all can happen. Very right. Blurring of the vision will happen only if it has progressed quite far, right? So these are the various signs and symptoms. So that's why it is said the better go for monitoring. Keep monitoring your blood pressure if you are above 40, maybe once in a year or twice in a year, so that at the right time the pharmacotherapy gets started. So since we have discussed that it is the most common CVS disorder, prevalence is 50% in the patients who comes under this age category, and it is the principal cause of stroke, risk factor of CAD. We have talked about it. So in some patients, some genetic considerations as a part of pathophysiology can happen. There may be some alteration in the genes which encodes the RAS components, maybe at the receptor level also, and it is heritable in 30 to 50%, runs in the families like diabetes. Presence of risk alleles along with environmental factors. So these are some of the genetic reasons which may attribute to development of hypertension. Regarding the autonomic nervous system, there can be sympathetic overdischarge in some patients, or there are some changes in the baroreflex pathway, or stress-induced vasoconstriction that can also result in hypertrophy of muscles. Endothelial dysfunction, yes, oxidative stress which alters many function of the endothelium, right? As a result, there is increased formation of reactive oxygen species and endothelin, which are vasoconstrictor in nature. RAS disturbances, rest that can lead to increase in renin and ultimately lead to hypertension. Now, it has been seen that in obesity, the people who are obese, slight activation of RAS in adipose tissue, which is a local RAS, is also linked with insulin resistance. So these are some of the etiological conditions which can lead to hypertension, but happens very rarely. Cigarette smoking, diabetes, dyslipidemia can lead to cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. So better to start pharmacotherapy as it will reduce the risk. It is important to reduce both systolic as well as diastolic, prevent the damage. Complications we have already discussed, that if the blood pressure is not treated, what it can happen. So most important being the myocardial infarction, left ventricular hypertrophy. So if the patient develops left ventricular hypertrophy, the heart won't be able to contract fully. So as a result, the cardiac output will decrease. The patient lands up in the heart failure. Stroke, cerebral infarction or hemorrhage, dissecting aortic. So these are the things which are preventable if the therapy is started. Then there are some drugs which can also lead to hypertension if taken over a period of time. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, cyclosporin, steroids. Yes, they are being the people who is into the bodybuilding and all who takes the steroids off and on. So there are very high chances of development of hypertension. High salt intake, alcohol intake, obesity and all can lead to that. So let's say a patient of hypertension comes in the OPD, and first you have to diagnose. After diagnosis, you have to give. So how to diagnose? Obviously, it's very simple. You check the blood pressure. So let's say a patient comes and you have checked the blood pressure. Uska aata hai blood pressure 160 by 100. So you write some drugs and ask the patient to go. But was it right? Maybe he's coming in a DTC bus. It's very hot outside. Then he waited for the doctor, was sitting in the OPD in the rush, already stressed up, job से भी छुट्टी लेकर आया है, and ultimately तो BP तो उसका 160 100 आने का high chance है, right? So just one, you can't depend upon one reading. You ask the patient to sit quietly, at least for a 5 or to 10 minutes, so that he can relax. I understand in the government OPD it is not possible, practically speaking. But what is the right way of doing the thing is important. You should know it. So ask him to sit quietly on chair for 5 minutes. And very important, feet should be on the floor. When I say feet on the floor, the flat feet. Usually you must have noticed that some people have the tendency, they sit in the chair, but on the floor they have the toes on, right? So that means they are anxious. Anxiety is again a very important reason of increasing the blood pressure. So if the person is sitting comfortably in the chair, his back will be touching the back of the chair and his feet will be put flat on the floor, right? He should not be on the toes. And at least minimum of 2 readings with the center of cuff at the level of heart should be taken. And if at the 2 or 3 readings you find that consistently the blood pressure is coming above a certain level, which is 140 by 90, then only you can label that person as a hypertensive and can think of giving lifestyle modification advice and drugs or medicines if required, right? One thing. Second is you have to rule out secondary causes also. So for ruling out the secondary causes, some laboratory test has to be done, right? So can you tell me some laboratory tests which we should undertake before we start giving the drug to rule out some secondary causes? क्या क्या कराना चाहिए? Very good. KFT, yes. Or lipid profile. Okay, VMA11 in pheochromocytoma, right? Okay, so we have a bunch of good doctors here. Thyroid, glucose estimation, angiography. नहीं यार अभी नहीं. Right. So yes, most of it written almost all the investigations. Yeah. So as you said, for the renal system, we will go for the KFT and the urine analysis also. Urine analysis and the urea and creatinine levels to check the endocrine system, serum electrolytes, and thyroid dysfunction. We have to do the TSH. For metabolic things, the fasting blood glucose, lipid profile, and hematocrit or ECG, if required, can be done. So these are the basic things because you have to rule out the renal causes and other causes. If you find out some renal or other cause, your objective is to treat that cause first. The hypertension will be taken care of automatically. And if all the reports come normal, then of course you have to start the antihypertensive. So once the diagnosis is established, you always start with a non-pharmacological advice, that is lifestyle modification. और वो क्या है? अगर वो overweight है, right? So you have to advise him to reduce weight and the BMI should be less than 25. Dietary salt reduction is very important advice because it really matters. So less than 6 gram of sodium chloride per day. But the question is, nobody measures the salt and then take that in the diet. So what you can advise to the patient is, जो vegetables में जो salt डला हुआ है, it's all okay, but don't take additional salt. Like you put it on the salad, eat lot of fried namkeens, right? So that thing can be avoided. That you can advise. Then also important is, okay, some Sheetal has asked, do we do these tests for every patient to rule out secondary? Yes, ideally yes, because you don't know it is essential or secondary. So before you start a treatment, specifically in the young population, let's say the patient is of 25 or 30 years, so unlike he's unlikely to have a hypertension at this stage. So highly chances there he must be having a kidney problem, endocrine issues and all. So in young hypertensive, so you have to do it. Otherwise also. So always rule out the secondary cause before you start the therapy. That is a right practice, a good practice. Okay, the other thing is to adapt the DASH type dietary plan. Anyone, what is the full form of DASH? ये क्या है? DASH type dietary. DASH का full form क्या है? तो गूगल करके देख रहे होंगे some of you. DASH actually stands for dietary approach to stop hypertension. So what should be the advice given to the patient? To take the diet which is rich in fruits and vegetables and go for a low fat dairy products with reduced content of saturated fats, right? So it's more concentration on the fruits part. They have a good potassium content, which is helpful. So it is a DASH type of dietary plan. Then moderation of alcohol consumption. It's again very important. For those who drink alcohol, they should consume less than 2 drinks per day in case of men. In women, less than 1 drink per day. And physical activity, to go for a regular aerobic activity, at least 30 minutes per day. So these are the lifestyle modifications which you will ask the patients to do it. Then see the result in next 15 to 2 to 4 weeks. If the blood pressure is still high, definitely you have to give the medicine. So it's again the same thing to restrict the salt intake, moderate alcohol intake, 20 to 30 grams in case of men, 10 to 20 grams in case of women. Increase the vegetable fruit in diet. BMI goal should be around 25, waist circumference and all. So this is a standard advice. Now it has been observed that the people who fall under this category usually respond by lifestyle modifications. But if they are not responding, you have to give the medicine. So pharmacotherapy is initiated if no response is seen. And for pharmacotherapy, we still follow the JNC 8 guideline, Joint National Committee. So as per these guidelines, there are 4 group of drugs which are labeled as the first line treatment. 4 group of drugs which are labeled as, can you make a guess क्या क्या हो सकती हैं? The first line drugs for the treatment of, yes, very right, JNC 8 only, very right. So you have written ACE inhibitors and ARB. Please remember, whenever I say ACE inhibitor, ARB उसके साथ ही है, right? No, beta blockers, sorry. Beta blockers were the first line of therapy couple of years back. Now they are not. Beta blockers are not at all the first line therapy. We will talk of the reasons later on. ACE inhibitors, ARBs, diuretics, calcium channel blockers. These are the drugs. अभी आपका diuretics का lecture हुआ होगा. So I'm again repeating, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, calcium channel blockers, and diuretics. These are the first line therapy for the treatment of hypertension. So as per the JNC 8 guidelines, what should be the treatment goal? So please, you can take a snapshot of this slide, which is important. So what this guidelines say, that if the population or the patient is above the age of 60, you are supposed to initiate the therapy if the systolic BP is equal to or more than 150 and diastolic is equal to or more than 90. In this age group, people who are above 60, systolic is above 150, diastolic 190, the therapy has to be given, right? If the BP is 146 by 90, if the BP is 146 by 90 or 146 by 88, let's say, so are we supposed to start the therapy? BP is 146 by 88. Yes, we won't. It's clear-cut guideline. And what should be the goal BP? To keep the systolic BP less than 150 by 90. So you will start with a one drug. If the patient is not responding, you can add another drug, which has to be from a different class. Remember that. It has to be from the different class. And your goal is to keep the BP between 150 and 90. And for the general population who are less than 60 years, here the limit is 140 by 90. So any patient, if the BP is 140 by 90, start the pharmacotherapy. And so the goal is to keep it below 140 by 90. So clear cut demarcation है. अगर 60 से नीचे है तो आपको 140 by 90 से इनिशिएट करना है, गोल भी सेम ही है. But if they have the comorbid conditions like diabetes and chronic kidney disease, here the goal BP is to keep the blood pressure below 140 by 90. Right? अब ये सिस्टोलिक डायस्टोलिक में से एक भी ये कैटेगरी से अगर अलग जा रहा है तो फार्माकोथेरेपी स्टार्ट होगा. Please remember that. Let's say if the systolic is less than 150, but the diastolic is 92, you have to start the therapy. दोनों का होना जरूरी नहीं है. Any one of these. Yes, so Ansh is asking the same thing. If only one diastolic or systolic more than limit, then also, yes, you are supposed to start the therapy then also. So here is a group of drugs which we have already discussed. In the non-black population, since these are all American guidelines, so they talk of black and non-black. So अपने यहाँ कोई issue नहीं है. ACE inhibitors, ARBs, CCBs, and thiazide type diuretics. Remember, the word is thiazide, not loop diuretic. So these are the first line therapy in non-black. But in black, it is CCBs and ऐसा क्यों? Just tell me the reason. Why in black person we are not prescribing the ACE inhibitors or ARBs? Poor responders due to ethnicity. What exactly that mean? Genetic causes. What are those? Because RAS is down regulated. Yes. Kartikeya Garg, right. Same Akshara. Yes, because their RAS system is down regulated. So ACE inhibitors are not found to be that effective. So for that reason, in black persons, usually the calcium channel blockers and thiazide type diuretics. And please always remember, it is thiazide, not loop diuretic. Loop diuretics are not prescribed for the treatment of hypertension. They are only prescribed for hypertensive emergency because they cause brisk diuresis. So हमेशा याद रखना thiazides ही होते हैं for the management of routine hypertension. And the patients who have chronic kidney disease, regardless of the race or diabetes status. So आपका line of treatment is ACE inhibitors and ARBs. जहां भी kidney word आ गया, so ACE inhibitors आएंगे because in the last lecture we talked of they prevent the development of diabetic nephropathy. So they becomes the treatment of choice. So it's very clear. Okay, somebody is asking Indian blacks. नहीं यार Indian blacks नहीं, हम तो वैसे ही काले हैं. यहाँ कोई issue नहीं है Indian blacks, American blacks का issues है. Of course, because of some genetic reason, their RAS system is down regulated. Okay, so we move on now. Now it has been observed that the younger population is more responsive to beta blockers and ACE inhibitors. In younger people, if there is no secondary cause, so anxiety or over sympathetic activity is the main reason for hypertension. So beta blockers are very effective, or anxiety related hypertension, beta blockers are very effective in younger population. But still it is advised, until and unless some compelling indication is there, beta blocker should be avoided, because over a period of time they do cause derangement in lipid profile, uh, can lead to hyperglycemia, loss of libido, fatigue, development of depression. So these kind of things are associated with beta blockers, and it has also been believed that beta blockers are not that good in preventing the myocardial infarction or stroke as compared to the other drugs like ACE inhibitor. So best thing is to go for ACE inhibitors, right? If the person is above 50 or 8, you can prescribe diuretic as CCBs. Both are effective. अगर high renin activity है तो ACE inhibitor, low है तो diuretic. But as I earlier said, nobody is going to check the plasma renin activity before you prescribe. To start prescribing the ARVs and all. African Americans already कई बार बात हो चुका है. So in this case, since they have low renin, so अगर ACE inhibitor देना है, so you have to add a diuretic with it, or beta blocker for that matter. So what should be the goal of therapy? To control both systolic and diastolic BP. Always start with a monotherapy as far as possible. Then later on you can add a second drug, but objective should be to start with a single drug, that too at the lowest possible dose. And it should not be aggressive treatment which can lead to hypotension. No, that should not be done. And it's very important to prevent the complications. So right group of drugs should be prescribed depending upon the patient characteristics. So here are the group of drugs. You have thiazide, loop diuretics. यहाँ लिखा तो है, but please remember, loop diuretic is only for hypertensive emergency or hypertensive crisis, where rapid diuresis is needed. Otherwise, it's not given. Potassium sparing diuretics, beta blockers, alpha blockers, mixed alpha beta blockers, and the ACE inhibitors and all. We will deal with them individually. Since you had a lecture on diuretics, so I won't go into much detail. So mainstay in the treatment of hypertension is thiazides. क्या mechanism है इसका? Anybody can briefly write what is the mechanism of thiazide? Block the sodium channels. Sodium chloride blocker, Symport blocker. Very right. So in the distal tubule, they block the sodium chloride Symport, and they are effective as monotherapy as well as an adjunct treatment, right? So loop diuretics are used in case of hypertensive emergency or left ventricular failure. What happens? A patient who has a left ventricular failure, the left ventricle won't be able to contract fully. So backflow can lead to pulmonary congestion. So pulmonary congestion, अगर आप patient देखोगे, auscultate करोगे, lot of crepitations will be heard, right? So if a patient comes with difficulty in breathing and has pulmonary congestion, crepitations and all, so he is into acute left ventricular failure. So here immediate diuresis is needed. So that's why we give intravenous loop diuretics. In that case, it is okay. Otherwise, not for the routine treatment. Yeah, somebody has written Lasix helpful. Yeah, spelling गलत कर दिया सर आपने, LASIX है, right? और इसको हम Lasix भी इसलिए बोलते हैं because it action lasts for 6 hours. That's why it is named as Lasix. Furosemide. Furosemide is a drug. It action lasts for 6 hours. That's why it is, the brand name is Lasix. चलिए. Advantages of thiazide over loop diuretics. Why it is that the thiazides are prescribed? Thiazides are prescribed because a single dose a day is required. One thing that goes in advantage. Second, they can consistently decrease or excrete the sodium ion throughout 24 hours. second thing. So loop diuretics have a short duration of action. So you have to give multiple doses, right? And if you give multiple doses and that will produce diuresis, the patient will keep on going to loop and he will be sodium depleted also. So that's why loop diuretics are not indicated. Second point, with loop diuretics, 24-hour sodium lot is not achievable. So that's why thiazides are opted. So that can lead to more ADRs if given twice daily. So that is a problem with loop diuretics. We have reserved them in cases of pulmonary edema or hypertensive emergency. Now, additionally, thiazides not only produce diuresis sodium loss, but more important than that is their vasodilatory component. They decrease the peripheral vascular resistance also. And that is this dual property actually is also helpful in taking care of hypertension. What is this dual property? One, they cause the sodium water loss. Second is their vasodilatory action. Long-term use of thiazide drug is harmful for kidney. Okay, we will talk about it. Okay, so this you all know that what are the various sites where these diuretic acts, like loop diuretics, they act in the thick ascending loop of Henle, thiazides act in the DCTs, and potassium sparing somewhere in late distal and all. So I won't go into the detail. Thiazides, as you rightly said, what they do is they decrease the or block the symport of sodium and chloride here, right? So as a result, what happens because of this blockade, more of positive potential is towards the lumen side. So this positive potential leads to entry of calcium in, which ultimately through this pump goes into the blood. So thiazides can lead to hypercalcemia, right? So in the subsequent your diuretic lectures, it will be all cleared. So please remember thiazides over a period of time can lead to hypercalcemia because they promote the absorption of calcium. Because transepithelial potential is disturbed. If more of positivity is there, so it will push the calcium ion inside. Right. So other thing is thiazides also, all diuretics also cause hypokalemia. Why so? Because this excess of sodium, which is in the lumen, ultimately will reach the late distal tubule or collecting duct, where some of it is exchanged with potassium. So sodium is taken up and potassium is excreted, which causes hypokalemia. So sometimes in explain why question they do ask why hypokalemia is seen with diuretics. So this is the reason for that. So thiazides, what they do is they block the sodium chloride co-transport. We have discussed this, increase sodium excretion, reduce extracellular calcium. तो cardiac output भी कम होगा, तो blood pressure कम होगा. So what happens? A compensatory RAS activation take place, which will try to increase the cardiac output, extracellular volume also. But in long-term use, thiazide, as I earlier said, causes vasodilatation or decreased vascular resistance. The hypothesis is why it happens, mainly because number one, they lead to the opening of calcium activated potassium channels that causes hyperpolarization of the vascular smooth muscles. As a result, the vasodilatation happens. Second point is they inhibit the carbonic anhydrase. As a result, the pH is altered, which again open the calcium activated potassium channels. Third thing, the sodium loss itself in the cell or less of concentration of sodium ion reduces the stiffness of the vessel. So because of these two or three reasons, thiazides are responsible for causing the vasodilatation, ultimately control of blood pressure. And chlorthalidone was a first drug which was released in the market. It is still being prescribed. It has a very long half-life. Once a day it is given. So it is a very important. You can take a snapshot of this slide because sometimes in Viva they do ask what are the various mechanisms of thiazide. So you can talk of diuresis as well as of vasodilatation. So these are the various thiazide diuretics: chlorthalidone, hydrochlorothiazide, indapamide, metolazone. आप बताओ इसमें से सबसे ज्यादा पोटेंट कौन है? Out of these 4 drugs, potency किसकी ज्यादा है? 12.5. Last two. Yes. Look at the doses. Right? So potency is dependent upon the doses, the minimum amount which is given to produce. So it is indapamide and metolazone. Indapamide actually is called thiazide-like diuretic because it has got some structure difference. And indapamide, if given in small doses, can also cause vasodilatation. That is another advantage. Anyway, so chlorthalidone dose is 12.5 to 25 milligram. Dosing is done in the morning. Hydrochlorothiazide dose is 25 to 100 milligram. But 50 milligram से ज़्यादा देने के बाद कोई इफेक्ट नहीं आता. So chlorthalidone is twice as potent as hydrochlorothiazide. Monitoring is required if the patient has got history of gout and hyponatremia, obviously. So these drugs are secreted in proximal tubule by OAT, you know that, and they act through the luminal side. They decrease the renal calcium excretion, can cause hypercalcemia. We discussed this. Hypokalemia भी हमने बात कर ली है. Another thing is they can cause hyperglycemia also, and indirectly it is because of hyperkalemia, which is responsible for causing the decreased insulin release. So what the guideline says, always to start with the low dose, that's 12.5 milligram of chlorthalidone or 25 milligram of hydrochlorothiazide. And if the BP is not achieved by this dose, increase in dose will not work too. Right? But in case of loop diuretic, it is just the opposite. We call them high ceiling diuretics, loop diuretics, because if you keep on increasing the dose, their efficacy also increases. But that effect is not seen with thiazide diuretic. So if the BP is not being controlled by low dose of thiazide, best option is to as a ACE inhibitor. And the last lecture we discussed that the combination of ACE inhibitor is with diuretic is synergistic. Now, can you write up some reasons why so? Combination of ACE inhibitor and diuretic is considered as synergistic. What could be the reason? Potassium balance, yes, Adiba ने लिखा है, बिल्कुल सही बात है. They cause hypokalemia, ACE inhibitors can cause, right? So one thing is that I take it. RAS system, Ekansh has written, yes, they stimulate the RAS pathway, yes, upregulated. So ACE inhibitors would be able to work in a better way. Very right. Both cause vasodilatation, okay, right? So these are the reasons. And another thing is thiazide effectiveness decrease with low GFR. The exception is metazolone. And the loop diuretics, they also work in low GFR. So this is a limitation of thiazide. कि अगर patient का GFR कम है, they are not able to work properly. But loop diuretics can work even in low GFR, and so is metalozone. But the antihypertensive effect with thiazide takes 3 to 4 weeks or maybe up to 1 month. So ऐसा नहीं है that today you have started the thiazide and in 3 days the BP will be controlled. You have to reassure the patient, keep monitoring the BP. The full-blown action will take 3 to 4 weeks because that vasodilatation takes some time. Sodium loss तो जल्दी start हो जाएगा. So what are the adverse risks of thiazide? Erectile dysfunction. So that's why they are usually avoided in the young population. Hyperuricemia, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and if the patient has got pre-existing ischemic disease, it can lead to ventricular fibrillation because of hypokalemia. Arrhythmias can take place. Digitalis toxicity can happen because of hypokalemia. Actually, potassium competes with digitalis to bind to the sodium potassium ATPase. So if there is a hypokalemia, more of digitalis will be able to bind to the pump. As a result, can lead to the toxicity. Steroids also amplify hypokalemia. Then the decreased clearance of lithium leading to increase in concentration of lithium. Lithium is usually prescribed in bipolar disorder, right? So if the patient is on diuretic, lithium is exchanged with sodium. It uses the same pump. So if the patient is on diuretic, so what happens? The sodium is not getting absorbed. So in the late distal tubular collected tube, the lithium start getting absorbed through the same channel. As a result, lithium toxicity can take place. I think we should take a break for 5 minutes and then we will be back, right? So at 12:10, okay? So we'll be back at 12:10.